legendary in certain Leamington spa circles. I'd inherited my love of spicy food from Dad's side of the family, but none of the domestic skills. Though I was artistic enough to make a plate look good, the taste of its contents was another matter. Hence Jason was the main chef in this household. But he wasn't quite as good as at ensuring the fridge was adequately stocked. Oh, why didn't I check the bloody letter? I managed to stop myself from swearing out loud. "I'm sorry I'm not going with you today, Aish," Jason said. "I really am, but I promise you, if you pick up a few sandwiches and pastries from the deli, the other ladies will be really happy." Not many pregnant women turn down deli goods, from what I've learnt. He winked, an obvious reference to my obsession with the almond croissants from our local deli. Anyway, I doubt anyone else has had the time to rustle up a MasterChef quality homemade dish. And if they have, he qualified, well, they need to get a life, if you ask me. You must go. You'll regret it if you don't, and you never know, you might meet some like-minded people. You said yourself you're keen to make some mum friends. I smiled. He knew what to say to make me feel better. It would have been nice to have Jason by my side in this first session, but I understood. We'd had this conversation a million times. He needed to put in the overtime while he could before the baby came. Being an IT manager often meant him working unsociable hours. I didn't like it, but I was used to it. "Thank you, Jace," I smiled and gave him a peck on the lips. "I suppose you're right." Fully dressed, I waddled back to the kitchen to look for a suitable plate for the sandwiches. To be honest, lunch wasn't the only thing I was worrying about this morning. Walking into a room full of strangers with the intention of making friends was a weird and nerve-wracking prospect. All that judgment. It made me feel anxious. And if that wasn't enough, the day was also likely to involve some awkward chat about the perineum and confronting childbirth head-on. I hadn't given much thought to the actual birth bit because it made me feel nauseous whenever I did. I was convinced I was going to need a caesarean, like Mum, and the thought of being butchered in a stark operating room had cost me a few sleepless nights already. I diverted my attention to our barely used kitchen cupboards, stooping down to poke around, looking for a dish I wasn't even sure we still had. We had to shed a lot of stuff when we moved back from Hong Kong 2 years ago. Crockery doesn't travel well, Jason had reminded me at every opportunity. He didn't have the same sentimentality for belongings as me. That was another thing I had inherited from Mum, a self-confessed hoarder. Jason came up behind me, spreading his hands over my bump from behind. He laced his fingers with mine, and I reciprocated, despite the fact that I'd rarely felt less sexy than I did right now. All swollen breasts, water retention in my legs, rounder than usual face. At 35 weeks and 3 days, I was rapidly getting too big for my even biggest maternity clothes. I didn't understand those women in Cosmopolitan who claimed they felt sexier up the duff. "You look sexy today," he whispered into my neck, between peppering it with little kisses. "I wish I didn't have to work." "You were late home again last night," I muttered. "You were still awake, though." "I wasn't," I replied, remembering how he had pushed himself into my back in an attempt to gauge whether I could be warmed up for sex. Of course I was having none of it. We both knew that I had pretended to be asleep or had blamed my bump when rebuffing his sexual advances countless times in the last few months. Much as I fancied my husband, I just couldn't face sex at the moment. I wasn't sure how much more rejection he could take. "You were just pretending to be asleep," he protested. As any woman who has ever been 8 months pregnant knows, it is practically impossible to be sound asleep anyway. Especially when your husband comes to bed late, having slammed the front door, which is just beneath your bedroom, and then starts trying to unbutton your maternity pyjamas, pestering you for sex. I shook my head. "Right, sure." "Well, the little snorts you were making weren't very authentic." He was humouring me. Sometimes Jason didn't.